who commands the winds and sea, make peace in your hearts and prosper the work of your hands. The blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always.
And on our way across the Bay of Biscay, we passed Aurora, to much exchanging of hooters. And there was a surprise guest at the captain's welcome aboard party.
Well done, Bobby. Thank you very much.
Our first port is Barcelona, with compulsory folk dancing. We took one of the open-top bus hop-on, hop-off tours. On a fine sunny day, a great way to see a lot of Barcelona's wonderful architecture, including much of its most famous son, Gaudi. His most famous building, the Sagrada Familia Church, is still very much work in progress, decades after his death. The Plaza de la Soy is home to an open-air market, as well as to Barcelona's actual cathedral, the Sagrada Familia being merely a church, of course. The Cathedral of St. Eulalia is a Gothic gem, started in 1298. It was substantially completed by the 15th century, but like most of the great European cathedrals, it's been worked on and off throughout the centuries. The facade was finally completed in the late 19th century. Partly a legacy from the Olympic Games, Barcelona's waterfront is modern and exciting and inviting. Christopher Columbus spent some time here after his discovery of America and may even have been Catalan. We pass Costa Concordia on our way out. Well, she didn't answer our horn signals, but we leave the coast of Catalonia behind now. Villefranche-sur-Mer, on the French Riviera, just a stone's throw from Nice and quite close to Monaco. Villefranche is a tender port with a deep water anchorage, but the ship's tenders have to come to this very small dock in front of the picturesque old town. The ancient citadel on the waterfront now houses the town hall, amongst other things, and affords views of the massive Ventura out in the bay. The town is a warren of narrow streets and alleyways, some of them very steep. St. Michael's Church dates originally from the 15th century and includes this ornate and grisly tomb to Scarampa di Cairo, a local pirate. The waterfront has plenty of cafes and restaurants, some of them quite smart. And there's a small town beach. This is Rue Obscure, Dark Street. I think this tourist is just posing for the camera. As we sailed out past Cap Ferrat, we were accompanied by a helicopter taking publicity shots of the new Ventura. Livorno is one of Italy's major ports and has a history stretching back many centuries, but much of that history was damaged during the Second World War. We were very brave and used public transport to take ourselves to Pisa. The Piazza dei Miracoli contains the three iconic buildings, the Duomo, the Baptistery, and of course the Leaning Tower. The Baptistery was started in the middle of the 12th century and finished 200 years later. The cathedral was started in the Romanesque style in the 1060s and over the centuries has been modified and partly rebuilt. Galileo Galilei was born in Pisa and did many of his famous experiments here, both in the cathedral and reputedly the Leaning Tower. His father and his brother were both famous composers of their day, and you're listening now to music composed by his brother Michelangelo. The 12th century tower now leans nearly 4 degrees and nearly 4 meters from the vertical. Modern dancing on the quayside to see Ventura off on its maiden voyage. Next morning, Ventura is anchored off Santa Margherita, Liguria, on the Ligurian coast, northwest Italy. This coast is dotted with a number of mainly small, classy resorts. Santa Margherita is a good place to base yourself along this coast because it has frequent tourist ferry services to some of the smaller resorts along the coast. The almost obligatory statue of Columbus because he's believed to have been born in Genoa, which is quite nearby. It's a very attractive town with some interesting buildings and some classy shops. It's April the 25th, which is celebrated as Italy's National Day of Liberation, when, in 1945, the final assault of the partisans forced the Germans finally to leave northern Italy. We've opted to take P&O's afternoon trip by ferry along the coast to Portofino, the classiest and most expensive of these little resorts along the Ligurian coast. Despite the increase in mass tourism, this place still very much has the class of its heyday in the time of La Dolce Vita. I'm afraid to say some unpremeditated acts of shopping were committed here. A away from the waterfront, there's a strange museum of processional crosses and narrow, colourful streets with more expensive shops in. Above the harbour for the classic view of Portofino, and the church with its above-ground cemetery, very well kept. And peeping out behind the headland, just a couple of miles away at Santa Margherita, Ventura. Time for our return ferry to Santa Margherita and to rejoin Ventura for the next leg of the cruise. And our tenders are waiting for us as we pull in to the harbour. Civitavecchia, the port of Rome since the Middle Ages, and a very busy port with about half a dozen cruise ships in, including Holland America's Amsterdam. The Laguna Pool being got ready for tonight's theatrical performance. More of that later. We took P&O's Rome on Your Own trip, which this time dropped us by the entrance to the grounds of the Villa Borghese, just near the Piazza del Popolo. This boasts an obelisk stolen from ancient Egypt, dating back to the time of Ramesses II. And the twin churches of Santa Maria de Montesanto and Santa Maria dei Miracoli, both dating from the late 17th century. It took about 20 minutes to stroll across to St. Peter's Square, where vast crowds were already gathering to visit the basilica and for a service that was due later on. Some privileged couple arriving to get married in St. Peter's. The car park attendants in Birkenhead don't dress like this. Then we decided to stroll along the banks of the Tiber, first of all past Castel Sant'Angelo, then towards the site of the Theatre of Marcellus. Then it's up onto the Capitoline Hill, with the monument to Vittorio Emanuele at one end. Some of these buildings date back originally to the time of the Roman Empire, but the whole thing was remodelled largely by Michelangelo. And of course there's a great view down into the Roman Forum. Typical for us, one of the major monuments covered up for restoration. And there we can see coming into view Trajan's Column. Our stroll continues past the Jesuit church. And in the Piazza Minerva, another Egyptian obelisk, this time on a base carved by Bernini. And this leaves us handy for our next destination, the Pantheon. And for a change, we have a look at the ancient remains behind this building. This area is always mad busy. The dome, almost 2,000 years old, made of Roman concrete. The internal restoration of the Pantheon is now complete and the building looks absolutely magnificent. It's turned into a must visit on all our trips to Rome now. Walking back now towards the Piazza del Popolo, we pass the Italian Parliament building. And down there somewhere you can just about see the Spanish Steps. The Via del Corso heaving with tourists and shoppers. And that evening, it's somebody's birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bernard. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you.
Up on deck, the show at the Laguna Pool turns out to be a cross between Gilbert and Sullivan and Pirates of the Caribbean. Alicante and the Esplanada de España. The city is dominated by the Castillo de Santa Barbara on Mount Benacantil, but we didn't make it up there. The Ayuntamiento, with its Baroque facade, houses a statue by Salvador Dali and also the official height datum point for the whole of Spain. The old town is all narrow streets and shady squares, ideal for Mediterranean cafe society. This is the 14th century church of Santa Maria. This is the pro-cathedral of St. Nicholas of Bari. Time to go back to Ventura to head for Gibraltar. But we didn't get to see much of Gibraltar because Joe took a nasty fall while trying to outrun a pack of the more elderly pianoers. And here are the passengers who did make it into Gibraltar, coming back on board for the afternoon sail away. The next morning the sea was a bit choppy, so much so that from the perspective of cabin P208, sometimes it looked as if Ventura was turning itself into a submarine. It was a lot calmer by the time we passed Queen Victoria that evening. Table 110, Bay Tree Restaurant, second sitting. The cruise was so enjoyable we all agreed to try and do the same thing again on the maiden voyage of the next new P&O ship. Maybe it won't happen, but the fact that we all thought it was worth trying says it all about this wonderful cruise.